Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salam, hello, welcome to you all, peace to everyone. I'm Adnan Hussein, host of this program, and you know about me, that this is a new channel, and we really need you to like this video, share it on your social media platforms, and subscribe to the channel. Of course, I always say if you can help, I mean, I'd rather you give to Gaza, but if you can help support us, patreon.com/Adnan Hussein, and help us cover some of the costs of this platform. But today, actually, I really would prefer that you support a media organization that is doing outstanding frontline on the ground work that is helping keep us all up to date and understanding with not only reporting but in-depth analysis, and that is freepalestanetv.video. You should go there. It's an indispensable resource. Go check it out if you're not already subscribing to those videos on whatever platform you watch on. They're on YouTube, but you can go to that website and you can support. You can make a donation and make sure that this vital resource for global understanding of what's happening in the region, in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Syria, that it stays on and is supported and flourishes. So go to freepalestanetv.video. And that's just...
It's just without the TV, it's freepalestine.video. But
Oh,
yes,
is it Free Palestine?
Yes, well, if you put Free Palestine TV on any search engine, you'll definitely find our website and all our pages on the social media. Thank you very much, Adnan, for that presentation and for hosting me today.
Well, it's wonderful to have you, Laith. And of course, that was just a prelude to saying that it's wonderful to have Laith Marouf, who's a friend, a colleague, comrade from a long way back, who is a journalist, media activist, geopolitical commentator. I'm sure many of in my audience are familiar with the great work that you've been doing, not only with Free Palestine TV, but also giving your commentary and being generous with your time on other platforms and shows. And so it's so great to have you on here. I wanted to start, with talking about recent events because Free Palestine TV has put out a few recent videos catching up on latest developments in Lebanon. And maybe before you get into the precise specifics of some of these political gatherings and meetings, declarations and statements that Hezbollah has made, a recent protest march in the Hamra neighborhood, is maybe give us a little bit of context since the early August 5th or 7th, the cabinet, of the Lebanese government, of this government with Joseph Aoun as the president, and what's his name? I'm always
Nawaf
blanking.
Salam.
Nawaf Salam, the prime minister who was parachuted in from the International Court of Justice. About what actions they took in requiring or saying that it would be a stated goal and objective by the end of this year to disarm Hezbollah and any resistance factions outside of the Lebanese National Army. Maybe you could set the context with how that decision came about and what the consequences immediately have been, so that when we talk about what's happened the last week, we have some understanding of that background.
Yeah, so Emperor Trump's envoy to the region, Thomas Barak, had come in with basically an order to the Lebanese government, and they took it as is, no adjustments. And that plan includes the disarmament of the resistance groups, including Hezbollah, in Lebanon by the end of the year. And this is really what triggered everything that we saw over the last week and a half. As you mentioned, the current Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, who was the head of the ICJ and delayed as much as he can, according to the orders of his masters, any decision on the genocide accusations against the Zionist colony at the ICJ until he left and was appointed as prime minister. And he was replaced. That's another part of the plot, as we can see, by a Ugandan judge that Uganda as a whole nation disowned, who's
Tinde.
she's there to defend the chosen people, and that Israel has a God-given right to exist and commit genocide, as we see, and that she will not allow the ICJ to come up with a decision until now. So this is the wider picture. An even wider picture to that is the story of Nawaf Salam and his family. Nawaf Salam's grandfather, Salim Salam, was a thief, literally, that bribed Ottoman land registrars in South Lebanon and North Palestine, and defrauded the indigenous people of the Hula Valley, which is kind of the panhandle that sticks out in the map of Palestine. That was supposed to be part of, by the way, Lebanon. It was part of the French occupation. He defrauded the indigenous people of the Hula Valley by bribing Ottoman registrars prior to World War I, changing the ownership of the land to himself, and eventually lobbied the British after the World War I to have the French hand over the Hula Valley to the British occupation because the French were refusing to allow Salim Salam to sell the Hula Valley to Zionist colonists, not because of their love of Arabs or Palestinians or Lebanese people, but because they were worried about the influence of Zionist colonists onto their colonial rule as the French government. And eventually in 1932, the French handed over the Hula Valley to the British, and he managed to sell the looted lands that he stole from the indigenous people through his bribery and defrauding to colonists and people. And before he did that, he drained the Hula Lake that used to be on the map of Palestine, north of the Sea of Galilee or the Tabariya Lake, and the swamp around it, which was a haven for migrating birds, one of the most important havens for migrating birds in the region, in order to allow the Zionists to build colonies there. This is the story of the grandfather of the current prime minister. And his uncle also owned lands in Haifa, inside the downtown Haifa city, which he built on a mall during the British occupation period, like an Art Deco building with all these stores and apartments. And he also sold that building to Zionist colonies before the creation of the Zionist colony. So here we have a history of a familiar treason and collaboration with the imperialists and the Zionists in the Salam family. And Nawaf Salam is just continuing the heritage of his family. And one last thing I would say here is that Salim Salam, Nawaf Salam's grandfather, attempted to do the same defrauding by bribing Ottoman registrars to the lands south of the Litani in Lebanon. He was going to, if he had the time before the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, he had already began bribing different Ottoman registrars to try to steal the lands of South Lebanon to also sell them to the colonists coming from Europe. So this is Nawaf Salam right now with his attempt to disarm the resistance and his refusal to have the Lebanese military protect south of the Litani, and or his refusal to issue uh, permits for reconstruction in the villages of South Lebanon is all indications that Nawaf Salam, the current prime minister, wants to finish the job that his treasonous grandfather began in the early 1900s.
Oh, that's so interesting, because a lot of people may have thought he's just some kind of bureaucratic, functionary who will have respect for law. He's a judge, he's a well educated person. But this heritage shows that his current political practices are very much aligned, which is why he was the one who was appointed. And I believe there had been other arrangements when the um, election of Joseph Aoun as president was taking place. There were negotiations with Amal and Hezbollah and other political parties who put stipulations that they had a candidate in mind who would have been a more acceptable prime minister, and that the new Lebanese government would not seek to disarm without having a national defense strategy plan for the Lebanese army. But it seems that the imposition of Nawaf Salam, as the prime minister, is something that was a break with the kinds of political agreements and arrangements that had been established within Lebanon. And so it is definitely an attempt to subvert some kind of national unity that might have existed um, in Lebanon, and to enforce this Zio-American imperial sort of dictates. What kind of response to um, his attempts have emerged politically? You reported just the other day about uh, the leader of Hezbollah, Naim Qasim's declaration, and as well a kind of meeting among various parties in the Roshed neighborhood. What can you tell us about how people are reacting and responding in Lebanon to Nawaf Salam's policies and this decision of the cabinet?
Yeah, definitely. Within the government itself, the ministers that belong to patriotic parties, not only those are associated with Hezbollah directly, have refused to join any cabinet meetings since then. So we're currently in an unconstitutional period. The prime minister, anyways, breached all parliamentary procedures, including, Robert's rules or Napoleonic parliamentary rules for changing all the agenda and forcing the vote on something that wasn't on the agenda anyways, this proposal by Barak. That's within the government. In terms of the military, we can already sense the crisis that is rising within the military. Much of the military is either people from the Shia community, from the working class communities, from the southern communities, or the kind of forgotten regions of the country. And this is any attempt to have the military used to disarm resistance and Lebanese citizens as a whole will lead to internal fragmentation of the military, most probably a mutiny. And the military is already not that armed anyways, and it will be kind of the end of the military if this is forced upon it. We already heard the commander-in-chief, General Haikal, in a visit to family of fallen Lebanese soldier. He was confronted by the families who said, this is our country, this is our people, our family members are part of the resistance. Will you be responsible for a civil war? And General Haikal said that he will not allow the military to be used in a way against the citizens of Lebanon. So we're seeing a beginnings of a crisis, although because generals don't speak to the media, We're not seeing that crisis out in the public, but behind the scenes, there's definitely a crisis between the military and the government of Salam and General Aoun. And in terms of, as you mentioned, we can see the creation of a new coalition of patriotic and liberationist movements that includes the Hezbollah, SSNP, the Syrian Social Nationalist Party, the Arab Nationalist, and others. And this is an indication that Hezbollah is not standing alone. We heard also the speech of Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sheikh Naim al-Qasim, where it was definitely the most fiery speech he has given since his beginning of his term. And he said he will not hand over weapons until there is an agreed upon and delivered upon military strategy to have the Lebanese army capable of defending the nation, and that they are ready for a Karbala-like battle. And for the viewers that don't understand what Karbala is, it means that you will, like Hussein bin Ali, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, went to a battle that is, the odds are completely uneven against a usurper emperor, and would rather die on the battlefield with their honor than live and accept the dishonor of a usurper government that doesn't care for its people. So here, in the same manner, Hezbollah is saying that they're ready to fight this till the end. And I don't think the Lebanese tools of the empire can deliver on such a battle as they are being instigated to do so.
Yeah, that's very interesting, that language about, Karbala, a lot of people might misinterpret that as, willing to die, suicidal, but in fact, actually it's more a question of dignity. It's saying that this is the limit, right, of our dignity. That's a very profound and intense, statement. That what's been the reverberations of his speech from just a few days ago? How has the public in Lebanon? I mean, I understand that the Lebanese people overall support the resistance. In the absence of a genuine national kind of military strategy for defense of Lebanon, that they support the resistance maintaining their weapons. So the government's policy isn't necessarily very popular among many people, but how are people reacting and responding to this situation, and in particular the statements of Hezbollah that they are determined not to give up their weapons? I'm sure people remember that, when Fatah, gave up its weapons in southern Lebanon during the early 1980s, that this did not lead to a peaceful kind of resolution. It led to massacres of people in Sabra and Shatila. Are those kind of memories in the mind of people in this context?
Definitely, they are in the mind of the people. We did cover a demonstration in Hamra Street, which is, Hamra is a liberal kind of neighborhood. It's where the tourists come shopping. There's a lot of coffee shops and restaurants and what have you. And so to see a demonstration in Hamra Street being called by the General Student Union, and the students are on vacation, it's summer, still deciding to come out and to target the Saudi embassy as a plotter of all of this attack on resistance. We heard statements from those students and their slogans talking about, of course, what happened in Sabra and Shatila, talking about, even if you disarm Hezbollah, there'll be another resistance group born, remembering not only Sabra and Shatila and what happened with the United States at that time, guaranteeing the safety of Palestinian civilians in Lebanon in return for the PLO withdrawing its militias from Beirut to Tunis. And what happened then is the massacre. So now we're being told that we need to believe the American guarantees that Lebanon will be safe if it only disarms. That's one thing. The other thing that those demonstrators highlighted was the fact that after that massacre, after the disarmament of the PLO in 1982, there was a birth of a new movement, a new resistance in the form of the Common Front of Resistance that included all the patriotic, nationalist, communist, and Islamist groups in the 80s. It was called Jamul after 1982. And their first reactions that happened on Hamra Street with an attack on two Israeli soldiers on a cafe on Hamra Street in 1982, right after the massacres that were trying to force their filthy Israeli money on a waiter that was saying he takes only Lebanese money. Anyways, are all indications how fresh those memories are. Add to it the fact that we saw everybody in this country, Christian, Druze, Alawi, Shia, even the Sufi Muslims, saw what is happening in Syria, where the minute the state is not there to protect all these minorities and the vast majority of Sunnis, we see the massacres that happened and continue. There was surveys done, public comments in the streets. I saw from one of the pro-Zionist, pro-imperialist TV stations here in Lebanon, they were doing streeters live, and they asked Druze Christians, including Maronite Christians and Sunnis, what do you think? Should Hezbollah disarm? And every one of them said no. You cannot disarm while this genocide is happening in Gaza and these massacres happening in Syria, clearly because people are unable to defend themselves, and the vicious monsters, imperialist and their Zionist and Wahhabi tools will commit massacres at you if you're not able to defend yourself. Another indication of how I think, how even in the most supposed to be anti-Hezbollah sector in Lebanon, which is the Maronite Christians, how things have now dramatically shifted. There was an interview yesterday with, I forgot his first name, but the second son of Jumayl, the leader of the Kataib party. His older brother is the current leader. And remember, the Jumayl family were brought as the collaborationist president of the country at the top of a Israeli tank in 1982 when they entered Beirut. His second son, on a channel that is basically phalangist, Christian supremacist, MTV, when asked about the weapons of Hezbollah, said that the weapons of Hezbollah have to remain, and that until there is a strong military to defend the country, that these weapons are the only thing that's going to defend the Christians of Lebanon. Now, that means that there is a clear, tectonic shift that happened within the Maronite sect here. And this is, of course, in contradiction to the Archbishop of the Maronites, who came out on Sunday or Saturday, I think, or Friday. There was an interview with him on the Saudi Hadath TV station, one of the nastiest TV stations in the region, where he crossed a lot of sectarian lines in his language that he was using. He, was very demeaning to the resistance. And I think now we see a battle happening within the Maronite community, and that hasn't happened since the 1970s. And so we're now clearly the vast majority of the country is against the disarmament of the resistance, not until the land is liberated, and definitely not until the military is strong enough to defend the country.
Yeah, that's important to see that unity and maybe also these cross-sectarian kinds of affiliations, because that, of course, has been used dramatically in Syria. And maybe we might talk a little bit more. You were just alluding to the sectarian massacres by this HTS, Takfiri jihadi government, well, occupying power in some ways. You could characterize it in Syria, that has pursued this sectarian agenda of attacking communities that were, non-Sunni, basically. So Shia, Muslim, or Alawis on the coast, Druze in Sueda, and that has also been used to threaten. So, I guess what I'm wondering is the fates, it's in some ways, between Lebanon and Syria are very closely connected. And it seems that if they cannot achieve, the empire's goals of a demilitarized South that's open for Zionist expansion in this greater Israel and having no military challenge, in the South, that if they can't achieve that internally through, politics from the Lebanese government that they've replaced and put in place against the resistance, that then there's threats of possible attack or using the Syrians. And Barak, who, by the way, I think has some Lebanese heritage. His grandparents, I think, were from Lebanon. And so maybe this is what the reason why he's been appointed, to be the imperial consul for the region. Had said some interesting, very strange things a month or so ago, where he sort of threatened that if there isn't an agreement and if the resistance doesn't give up its arms, that perhaps it would be legitimate for Syrian militias and so on to invade in parts of Lebanon, and that it would be just part of a greater. I mean, he used this kind of this anti-colonialist argument about the illegitimacy of the Lebanese state, because it's forged from French colonialism, and really it's all part of the same region. And so why not, now that they have a government that they seem to trust and support, that is pursuing its goals in the region, well, why not have a greater Syria? I mean, I don't think he's actually a very serious. They don't want an integrated greater Syria, but that was used as a threat. And so I'm just wondering about your thoughts and comments about if it can't be achieved, because Hezbollah does not plan to give up its weapons, and in fact, there's no popular support for them to do so within Lebanon. Whether there are outside forces that may be leveraged to try and achieve it, by other means, and what you think about that possibility and how people will respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in my mind, there's no way the Americans have enough power on the ground in Lebanon to confront or disarm Hezbollah. The Christian militias that are fascist are very small numbered. The Wahhabi death squads are not strong in Lebanon. There was a defeat of them by Hezbollah in 2018. So the only possible plot that the West can work on is this invasion from the outside. The Zionists can't invade from the south. They tried for 60 days direct war with Hezbollah, 66 days, and they lost the battle in the south. And now they have destroyed the villages in the south. So an invasion from the south of Lebanon would mean all Hezbollah needs to do is carpet bomb the frontline villages that are already destroyed and destroy any invading force. That means that they can't do it from the south. So we have the possibility of HTS invading from the north, that was also kind of attempted with a test case just after the fall of the Assad government. HTS tried to invade from the North Bekaa Valley, and the Lebanese military just evaporated, and the local militias of the tribes and the clans defended the north of Lebanon and defeated the special forces of the HTS. They're called the Red Bandanas, and destroyed 40 of their armored vehicles and their columns as they were, and even liberated 2 Shia villages inside Syrian territory at the time, until the Lebanese military returned somehow and cut the supply route of the militias of the tribesmen, and the Israeli Air Force started hitting the high positions that the clans and tribes had taken over, overlooking the battlefield. So, there was an attempt then, and the HTS was unable to deliver on this, required plot by the West. We also saw what happened to HTS in Suwaida. They were defeated. They haven't been able to control Suwaida. The only reason that they succeeded in the coast is because of the Russian, I think, collaboration with HTS. In fact, at the time, the Alawi population in the mountains were not fighting, but the Russian military opened a space, handed over a few weapons, and told them to attack, and then closed its bases and watched as everybody got slaughtered. So, in a way, even the Alawis up until now are not defeated. There's quiet happening because people are dispersed in the forests and the mountains hiding, but we'll see where that goes. And yesterday, another indication of where a plan could go for the Americans and the Israelis in Lebanon is the Israeli military advanced inside Syria to less than 6 kilometers away from the highway between Damascus and Syria, on a top of a mountain that overlooks the Beirut-Damascus highway and the main Bekaa Valley highway. So this is a point that's literally at the middle of the Bekaa Valley. So if there is going to be an attack by the Israelis on Lebanon, it will happen not from the south, but from the middle of the country, where they will descend from Syria, and maybe a combined attack from the north with HTS. I don't know if the Israelis are going to succeed in their attack, but this is the most probable and most dangerous scenario.
Okay, wow, that's interesting to know. I mean, you're talking about the Syrian situation. I'd like to find out more analysis about Jolani's kind of rule. I mean, there were some kind of speculations that, like, he didn't have much control over his own kinds of forces. These people, are in some ways just operating fairly, autonomously, or maybe with loose direction. But there was a lot of talk about his government maybe not lasting because, even internal forces might object to some of his policies and so on. And I'm wondering, what do you think about the internal situation of HTS? And you also alluded to something really interesting that I was curious about, which is this ambivalent role that Russia has been playing. And I mean, most of the time people used to think of Russia as having been supportive of the Assad regime and, opposed to these kind of jihadi takfiri sorts of groups that are much more aligned within the politics of the Zio-American and its allies, Turkey, Qatar, and these Gulf states, Arab reactionary monarchies, and so on. but maybe there's a more complex picture. So I'm kind of interested in, is the possibility for Jolani's government hanging on partly because maybe there is uh, collaboration and support on this, like David corridor and other things, that Russia is not behaving in the way that we might have thought when it supported the Assad regime against these kinds of forces 6-7 years ago. How do you analyze what's happening inside Syria?
Well, first off, even if we, a rudimentary look at the map of Syria, will understand that Al-Jolani and the HTS Wahhabi death squads are only in control of kind of the population backbone of Syria between Aleppo and Damascus, this main highway and those major cities on this main highway. In the south, the Israelis occupy much of the south, and then you have Suwaida out of his control. And then you have the whole 1/3 of the country under direct American and Kurdish militia occupation in the north, east. Even the Tanaf base that the Americans occupy has grown. So you could imagine how big the area that the Americans directly control in the east of the country is. And in the coast, there's a power sharing dynamic between Turkey and Russia. So HTS doesn't really control a country. And they cannot enforce their control, neither against, let's say, Suwaida and or the northeast, the Kurdish militias there, and or against the Turks and the Israelis and or the Russians. So what country exists here, and how can it sustain itself without any resources, with so many of the revenues of the state out of its control? The major resources of the country are the crops and what have you. So it's non-existent. There's a militia that is holding hostage the main population centers between Aleppo and Damascus. And it's important to note also that the majority of the Sunni population in Syria is of the Sufi sect, mystics, part of the Qadiri school and other schools like this within Sufi Islam. And a lot of their preachers are being targeted, are in hiding, have been killed, their mosques looted. So there's a mass resentment within even the religious, cadres of these mosques and so forth against the HTS and their control. So things are not as simple for HTS to rule the country, and they cannot continue ruling the country for much long. They're not required to, I think. This is not their job. Their job is to create as much frisons within the community and the nation of Syria that it cannot coagulate for a long time again as a nation. And as for Russia, it's important that we remember Russia prior to the Soviet Union, what it was and what trajectory it was going on, and how, the Soviet era was a kind of out of the historical context of Russian history as a nation and as an empire. And prior to the Soviet Revolution, the Russian elite were emulating Western European elite. It started with their expansion into the east of Asia, into Turkic and Mongolic and Inuit lands, and occupying them and trying to create an empire on the same way that the Anglo-Germanic and the Latin empires have done. And the royal family of Russia were intermarried into the royal families of Europe, the Prussians, the Greeks, and others. And during World War I, it was aligned, before the Soviet Revolution, was aligned with the rest of the Europeans against the Austro-Hungarians and the Ottomans. And we were lucky as Asians, Africans, and Latin Americans that the Soviet Revolution happened and breached the integration of Slavic and Russian people into the fabricated whiteness. And as you know, for a while, the Soviet Union elevated all nations and said they're equals, and that helped the whole peoples within what is Russia and the rest of the planet. Today, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the return to this, state-sponsored language that President Putin is putting forward about saving the Christian family and Christian civilization and orthodoxy and so forth, this is a return to that. And it shouldn't, and while it may seem like it's in contradiction to Western European language or aspirations, it actually isn't. It is, in fact, asserting that Russia wants to save the whole whiteness, the whole white Christianity, the whole white family, and is juxtaposing itself and speaking now, not anymore in the language of the Soviet Union that spoke to the South and the East, now is directing its language to the West and the North, to these fascists in Europe and North America that are feeling that their states are not white enough, are not Christian enough anymore. And Russia is saying, we want to be part of this and we want to save it. We want to be your savior. And this is where it's very dangerous for all, peoples that are anti-colonialist. And this is why Russia refused to allow Syria to fight the Zionist violations of its airspace before the collapse of the Assad government. I wouldn't call it regime, by the way. Otherwise, we have to call it restating the world is a regime, truly. And this is why the axis of resistance cannot almost trust Russia with anything. Thank God Iran didn't take any air defenses from Russia, although Russia took the money and never delivered on the air defenses, and Iran had to sue them for the money back for the S-400s that were never delivered. And can you imagine the betrayal that Russia would have when they would have turned off the air defenses if Iran had them during the attack by Israel? So this is the wider picture. This is not an attack on Russians, Russian people. I don't care, honestly, if Russia, sides with peoples around the world that are seeking liberation from Western imperialism. I don't care if they want to, care only for themselves. Fine, just don't stamp in my way. The problem currently for us as people in this region is that Russia is actually working against us. When we say the Syrian military wouldn't have fallen if Russia didn't allow it to happen, when we say that Russia could have at any moment stopped its own citizens, the 2 million Russians that are inside the Zionist colony, from either participating in the genocide and or could have cut its trade with the Zionist colony. Russia could have done many things, and it chose not to do any of them and watched as the genocide continues.
Yeah, it's definitely in an ambiguous position in some ways because, of course, because of the Ukraine war and so on and sanctions on it. It was in much more of a closer alliance when it needed, it has needed support from China, and it cultivated these relations with Iran. But I think, there's reasons to be cautious, as you're pointing out on like its wider geopolitical interests and orientation in the region. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, as you just were saying, the genocide that's taking place in Gaza, which is real driver of the whole region, and the crucible really for this alignments around whether you're fighting against empire or in service of it, um, is that now we're seeing that there is supposedly some plan that is approved, and we're imminently watching whether it will be actually implemented to try and go into Gaza City, and try and complete the sort of ethnic cleansing, and that was clear as the general's plan from the beginning was some kind of goal and aspiration. But of course, at the same time, that there's the need to mobilize 60,000 Israeli troops for this effort, and the difficulties that they're having getting reservists to come back, creating a brigade of people our age, okay, a new brigade for people like us supposed to join and at least, relieve by doing border, guards and so on, and also going around the world trying to recruit more, international Zionist supporters to come and fight in the Israeli occupation forces. So there's questions about how capable, what the stresses and strains, like materially speaking, are on its capabilities militarily, and at the same time that these ambitions are being articulated, and Netanyahu is talking about, actually in an open way, acknowledging a kind of greater vision of a greater Israel, that, like, he's openly said, yes, that's the vision that I have, which I don't think he had said in exactly the same way before, even though we all know that that's been their plan. At the same time, however, in Khan Yunis, just in this last week, there's like a major organized attack by, Gazan resistance, on an Israeli sort of installation and base, and even an attempt to take more captives. These don't jibe so well with the idea that we've been hearing over and over from the Israelis, that they intend to put settlers back in. They're going to, push all the Gazans out. If Khan Yunis, this is maybe the third or fourth time they've said that they've cleared it, they've mapped all of the tunnels, they no longer is it a problem, but yet they keep facing the resistance. So I'm wondering how you analyze what's going on in the Gaza situation, and what are the kind of constraints? How should we appraise the kind of ideology and statements versus what we're seeing, on the ground?
Well, looking at the last 23 months, it's clear the only military strategy that the Zionists have is genocide. They have been unable to defeat any of their enemies, and this includes, of course, the Palestinians inside the Gaza extermination camp, the Lebanese resistance, the Yemeni resistance, the Iranians, and this, military efforts were not done by just the Zionists by themselves. As you alluded to, we know of 20,000 American citizens that are fighting inside Gaza. These are not like dual citizens, okay? So you could probably add to it tens of thousands of Europeans and Canadians and Australians and New Zealand and so forth. These are these are actually, wearing Israeli fatigues, but there's also the mercenaries, and that includes Wahhabi death squads that have been imported. And this also includes stuff like Blackwater and, whatever.
GHF and
Yes, right. So if in 23 months the Zionists haven't been able, with all these capabilities and all the money and all the propaganda and all the weapons of the West combined, haven't been able to defeat anybody, it's clear they're not going to suddenly defeat somebody. But what they can continue doing is genocide innocents through mass bombardments from air, from sea, from land, indiscriminately, and mass destruction and starvation. And that's the only thing they can do. And they're going to do it, and they're going to continue doing it until somebody defeats them fully, until something bad happens that stops Western governments from continuing military supply of the Zionist colony. If there's one day of missed deliveries of weapons to the Zionist colony, their whole effort collapses. This is how overstretched not only the Israeli military machine is, but the whole Western NATO military industrial complex is stretched to the max to feed the Zionist colony and, of course, the war in Ukraine, but more so their priority is the Zionist colony. So yes, they will attempt to occupy Gaza City. Doesn't mean they'll succeed. They will definitely succeed in killing more innocents, but they will not be able to defeat the resistance. And the longer this battle drags, the higher, of course, the number of the victims will be. But the more assured that the collapse of the Zionist colony will be a cataclysm. The longer they drag this, the more abrupt the collapse is going to be, and the bigger the bloodbath that will come with it and around it. So that's all I can kind of predict for where we're going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're pointing out also that this is, an effort of the entire West, right? I mean, to sustain this, it just reminds me so much. I'm a medieval historian, and I know you love medieval history and history because when you go out on those reporting tours in the south of Lebanon, you go to Beaufort Castle, and you talk about some of these architecture and archaeological sites and how they're embedded in the landscape and the histories. But it reminds me so much of the 200-year history of the Crusader states that were unlike other eras of colonization where they were uh, sponsored by a particular nation state colonizer, whether it was France in West Africa or the British in India. These were, nation states that expanded the territory that they controlled and ruled and could extract the resources of and oppress those people. But like the Crusader states, the Zionist colony is really an expression, you might say, of a collective project of the West, right? It's not just one country, or even though, the US is its primary imperial sponsor, it requires actually the resources to survive of the whole West, just like the Crusader states constantly had to have mobilizations from across Latin Christendom and Western Europe to hang on to these little enclaves in Akka, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Antioch. They lost Edessa early on, so early, one of the 4 principalities. And it just, kept requiring, major mobilizations of resources from the entire Latin Christendom. And likewise, this is something that requires the entire West's collaboration, complicity, support, and so on. So, because they're so overstretched, it seems like the real question is what can break some part of this, kind of Western sort of alliance. And it's also within the region only a few sources of resistance, and you named them all: the Lebanese, Yemeni. Syria had been some part of it and now is subverted. Iran, and of course in Gaza. Um, you know, uh, One thing that a lot of people have been asking is like, well, why is there no, and even George Abdullah, like, okay, I wanted to ask you about George Abdullah because he made such interesting comments. And I'm wondering, I only heard his comments when he arrived, after being released from a French prison after 40 years of incarceration, the statements that he made upon arrival in Beirut, but I haven't heard much about whether he's, continuing to speak out or what's his political role maybe now in Lebanon. But what he said at that point was, where are the solidarity, from, and he didn't just say the countries. I thought this was interesting. it wasn't just like, where's the Egyptian government, Jordanian government? I mean, he knows these are corrupt regimes that are totally compradors, co-opted by the empire. But he actually called upon the people of Egypt. He said, if 1 million of you go, like, you will overwhelm. And so a lot of times people ask, well, why are they not, mobilizing in the way that you see Yemen, 1 million people every Friday for Jummah and protest. And now it's getting, maybe it's worth also asking you about that, because there have been some very interesting statements about, dissatisfaction with, the role that they've been playing so far, saying, we want to go and break this siege, and these Arab regimes in the, these corrupt Arab regimes are preventing us. If they would just get out of the way, we will, do it. We will take care of it. So how do you analyze and explain this kind of popular desire, to be in solidarity with the Palestinians, but the practical limitations because they're under these authoritarian regimes? And it's only places where there's been popular revolution. And even in Lebanon, which has a problematic government, there's space for those protests to articulate that, because there's the resistance factions are so strong. So how do you make sense of what the Arab region, the contiguous nations, and George Abdullah's sort of call? How do you analyze this situation? I've been thinking about it, and a lot of people have been thinking about this question.
Well, it's important to note here, just as an example of how much repression there is for anyone that is supporting Palestinian liberation or the end of the genocide, even if they're not supporting resistance, is that there's, I think, around 1,000 Jordanians languishing in jails right now, many of them youth, that have been disappeared and not even put on trial since October 23rd. And nobody gives a damn about them around the world. In Egypt, it's the same thing. There was, in fact, a few weeks ago, a few youth attacked a police station in Al Arish area. So, and that led to huge riots and confrontations. A lot of things happen that people don't hear about in the West. And remember that caravan that was timed with the last flotilla.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a lot to say about the organizing of this. But there was two groups. One group arrived by airport to Cairo. It included a lot of internationals and Arabic peoples that had more money. And they were confronted in the streets when they were heading to Sina. They were stopped at the bus stations, basically rounded up and beaten. The Western activists just, linked hands, didn't fight back. The Arabic activists fought back. And I think 30 of them are still in Egyptian jails, and nobody cares about them, including the organizers of this caravan, including those Western activists that came to Egypt with those Arabic activists. Not one word. Not one word. They didn't mention their name. Okay. There was the other group that went through Libya, a caravan that came from Mauritania to Morocco to Algeria to Tunis to Libya. And, Libya is occupied in two parts. One part's the Emiratis own, basically, where General Haftar, who lived in the CIA Langley office for 26 years before they brought him on the back of a CIA jet to rule that part of Libya. He surrounded the caravan in the eastern part of Libya, in the middle of the desert, and let them starve and go thirsty for days before they were beaten to pulp and sent back to their countries. So I understand the sentiment of George Abdullah. I support his statements. and definitely there should be more. And the main problem right now is that there's no leadership. George Abdullah did a great thing because he filled a gap in the public speech pattern that is out in the Arabic public since the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, but also being a pan-Arabist, pan-humanist, communist, was able to speak to the masses without religious references or what have you. So he did something that is needed to be done, and more should be directed to the Arabic people to have more courage to confront their dictatorships. But remember, the cost of doing something for an Arabic person in an Arabic country, again, that is occupied by Canadian and American and Western troops, is 1,000 times more heavy than the price for a Canadian to actually grab a gun and take out an Israeli, embassy worker, as happened, for instance, in DC. That man, Rodriguez, Elijah Rodriguez, who shot the two Israeli propagandist embassy workers in Washington, D.C., his life and his treatment in the jail will be much better than the life and treatment of a Jordanian or an Egyptian student carrying a placard in support of Palestine. So the courage that is required, and so I am fine with George Abdullah screaming at our own masses, his own people, the Arabic people, to rise up. But if I hear one Westerner say that, I don't allow them, because there is no more cowardice on this planet right now. And, the words really escape me when I think.
I know.
There's a lot to be done in the West, and people are not doing it. That's I know we're going after the 1 hour, probably alluded, but you referred to the Crusades, and this is a very important thing. And it's your question was double-headed there. So I personally call what we're living the Crusades right now. The genocide that is being committed and the colonization that is being done is in the name of the greater Israel. It's not being done in the name of greater Christendom or the return of, Christian rule over Palestine. It is the enslavement of the Arabic peoples under Jewish rule in those clear terms that our enemy says. It's not me that defines, and I cannot redefine things with counter to what my enemy defines themselves. That's like, and there's even a bigger similarity between the situation right now and that of the time of the Crusades, is that the trauma that the Arabic people, specifically the greater Syria region of the Arabic people, lived was a double whammy of the Crusades with the Mongol invasion coming at the same time, burning down all the cities of the Baghdad and Mosul and Damascus and Aleppo and Jerusalem and Tripoli and every major city, and burning down all the book stores and the libraries, and killing all the scientists and all the leaders and so forth. That led for a millennia of Arabic decline that the Arabic people were unable to rise from. And there was that attempt to rise from that a millennia of humiliation of the Arabic people, not a century as the Chinese lived. We lived a millennia of humiliation with the Arab revolts at the end of World War II. And we almost escaped. But then they brought us the new Mongol horde in the form of these Wahhabi death squads brought from Central Asia mainly, and the Gulf states, to mass kill and destroy and depopulate the region. So pity.
And that's only, after direct sort of imperial invasions in Iraq, Afghanistan. I mean, so you have waves of 30, 40 years of just total devastation, war, and chaos, either from external invasion and occupying forces or from sponsoring, as you're saying, these kinds of militias that just destabilize and sow chaos and sectarianize the whole politics of the region. That's yeah, yeah. But I mean, it's what you're mentioning is like so. In fact, exactly what Ibn al-Athir in his chronicle says for the beginning. I think it's of book 10, where he it's either 9 or 10. The sort of introduction to that book in his kind of world chronicle of history says that on the one hand you have the Ifranj have been invading, and they've established an enclave. And by the time he's writing in the 13th century, it's been waves, and it's been over 100 years of continuous kind of replenishing of warfare coming from Western Europe to come and attack. And he says, and this is particularly for the 13th century, the devastations of the Mongols coming in from Central Asia, and that the Arab Islam and Islamic world is facing these twin kinds of devastating forces. In fact, at the time, he thought the worst was the Mongol. Like, you could eventually get rid of these, Crusaders, and he could see, that with the Mamluk kind of counterattack after Salahuddin and the Mamluks, they were having some success at limiting, the devastating consequences of these Crusader states. But the Mongol invasion, but they, in the end, the Mongol invasions, in the end, they converted to Islam and just became your basic rulers, in the normal sort of way. So, but it's a great analogy. I'm glad that you found that it's worth thinking about. Usually, you don't think of 13th century history as somehow relevant to the 21st century, but in a way, there is a very close analogy that Ibn al-Athir saw it exactly as you were saying. Yeah.
Yes, and obviously, Ibn Khaldun will tell you those hordes, once they settle in the city, they become the next soft ruler, and another horde comes from the edges of the empire. But you see, look, it's very important for people to read history, and especially those, us in this region, we read our history. We can read from our lessons. People in the West are stuck in a 600-year history cycle, or, that started with the invasion of the Americas, and they can't envision any history before that, or try to even learn from it. They think it's as if history started with the invasion of the Americas. And anyone that wants to learn about what's happening in the Arabic world needs to go back and look for the history of this region. Otherwise, you're just talking about incidents as if they are unconnected. You're not going to learn lessons. You're not going to understand how people have lived these things in different ways, and how are they going to respond to them today differently.
Yeah. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking about recent history with you, as well as having a chance to go over the deeper and longer connections. I've really appreciated it so much, Laith, to be in touch with you again and have your insights about the region, about what's been happening and the geopolitical context. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we'll have future opportunities to have you come around again and give a sort of resistance media report. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Adnan. See you soon, inshallah.
Inshallah. So, listeners, tune in next time. We have these kinds of discussions happening all the time. I hope you've appreciated this opportunity to hear from a wonderful journalist and really insightful geopolitical commentator, Laith Marouf. So until next time, peace and solidarity. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.